Chapter 1. Jack Swan sat in the oakwood chair, one hand on the throat of a wine bottle, the other fingering the trigger of a .44 Magnum. He had no idea where he was or how he came to be there, only that he was in an apartment on the second story of a building located within the confines of what the human race called New York City. Initially, he thought he had picked up the .44 to kill himself. Bang. Send a bullet straight through his head. Cover the glass behind him in a dark red liquid accompanied by bits of stringy brain matter. He was hoping that maybe it would look similar to white canvas that's had a bucket of red paint thrown over it. But being an ex-cop, he knew there was a difference. He thought he had picked up the .44 to kill himself, and that state of mind existed right up until the barrel was in his mouth and pointing at the back of his throat. But a thought came to him in that moment that made him stop. Wasn't this all a bit cliché? Sure it was. Ex-cop sitting down somewhere with a bottle of alcohol and a handgun waiting to pull the trigger. It was like a novel with the words stamped on the front. Kid grows up reading detective magazines and watching shows like The X-Files, joins the force, helps out the big guys until he gets promoted to one, finally breathing a sigh of relief now that he has the title of detective. He spends the next 20 years walking through the halls, everyone shouting a greeting. "Morning, Detective Swan," or "How are you today, Detective Swan? Would you like a cup of coffee today, Detective Swan? How much would you like me to kiss your ass today, Detective Swan?" And he had the partner, and he solved the cases, and when he got home his mind just couldn't stand being alone too long, because he had seen so much that he was scarred by the endless images. The word in a nutshell. Cliché. But this time around, it wasn't just the images that made him think of the suicide. He also happened to be the last man on Earth. Well, he didn't know if that was specifically true. He figured that either he was the last man or one of the last. Jack couldn't remember the end of the world. He came to the conclusion that either his memory had blocked it out, or perhaps he was simply just too drunk to remember it in its entirety. Bits and pieces came to him. Screams in the dark, gunshots, visions of things burning. At one stage, he recalled that he had to use his gun on something. Someone recalled running. From where and to where he didn't know. Alleyways, people, water, buildings, cars. Blood. That last one is the clearest. Blood in front of him, almost seeming to glow on the black bitumen road. Shock sweeping through him and grabbing at his heartstrings, tugging them like the organ was a puppet on a small stage. He wasn't quite sure why it had caused him so much shock to see the blood. Many times before that, he had ventured out on cases that contained horrifying images 10 times the psychological effect that that puddle of blood had had. The conclusion he came to was that maybe it was somebody that he knew. A friend, a relative, a girlfriend perhaps. None of it mattered now anyway. He was stuck in an apartment in New York City. And the creatures, they were outside. The ex-cop had heard them for as long as he had been here. A constant whispering. Not a natural whispering, but an uneasy one. A whisper that exchanged words as if they were a precious thing, something to be handled carefully. The whispers were talking about him. He was convinced of it. He was hearing the plans of what they were going to do when he finally emerged from the apartment. How they were going to grab him, end his life, feast on him until all that remained was a pile of torn clothes covering a blood-stained skeleton. The remains would sit there, bathing in the sun for a couple of weeks, months. Maybe survivors would come along, find the bones. One of them would call him a poor bastard, while the others checked him out for valuables. They would find the .44, take it from him, and move on. He wouldn't be buried in the ground, and he wouldn't be missed.
Well, it's not like anyone would miss me anyway, right? I mean, look around. It's the goddamn end of the fucking world.
Jack Swan laughed hysterically, his arms out in front of him as if he was going to put them around somebody. The laughter increased, and soon he was leaning back in the chair, holding his abdominal muscles.
Yep. The end of the fucking world, alright.
The smile now fading from his face, he lowered his eyes to the revolver. It was still lying on the table in that face-down position, the chrome reflecting the sunlight that was coming through the glass window, and the barrel facing the other side of the room. Reaching his hand out, Jack picked it up, wrapped his index finger around the trigger, and placed the barrel between his lips. He was now the closest he was ever going to be to pulling a lever that would end his life. No longer caring about the cliché image. No longer caring about survival. If he had to put another spoonful of canned shit in his mouth, he would not be able to down it. The taste made him dry reach. Having run out of actual food a week before, he had found some cat food in one of the shelves of the kitchen, and had been eating that. Each mouthful felt like he was putting a gigantic slimy slug on his tongue, accompanied by some sort of disgusting muscle tissue that's been sitting out in the sun too long, zapping it of hydration, and replacing that hydration with a pasty jelly-like sauce. He hated it, and hated what his life had turned into. He closed his eyes, and pulled the trigger. No sound. No blood splattering against the window alongside the brain matter. No body falling from the chair. There was only the sound of the hammer clicking against the empty space where the bullet should have been. Opening his eyes and sighing, he placed the gun on the table again and took another swig of wine.
Attempt 1. Bullet missing from the chamber.
He made the mental note, and leaned back in the chair again. Jack was playing a deadly game of Russian roulette with himself. After he had inspected what ammunition remained and discovered he had only one bullet left, he had loaded it into the chamber, spun it several times, then pointed the gun into his mouth. That was when the cliché thoughts had started, and his mind had thought twice. The most recent attempt was attempt 1. He intended to keep trying until he got it right, and his life was ended. He shut his eyes then, and listened. What he got in response was the whispers. He tried his best to put them out of his mind, and after that, he tried his best to numb his mind of the sound. Numb his mind of everything. The whispers, the room, the gun, the alcohol that had taken its toll since he started to drink the bottle of its contents half an hour, 45 minutes before. He numbed everything, until he was deep inside his mind. A place he didn't recognize as one he had been before. Almost a hypnotic state.
Close your eyes. Count backwards from 10. Focus on my voice. You are now back to when there was something to look forward to. The real world. What do you see? What do you see?
He followed the hypnotic state down further. Whether this was a type of sleep he couldn't figure out, but he followed it down anyway. Down, down, down he went. And suddenly, it seemed he wasn't in his mind, but real life. No. A memory. A memory of her. Chapter 2. Alexandra. Was that her name? Alexandra? He didn't know. There was no last name coming to him. He only remembered the first. It echoed through his head over and over and over, each time getting louder, and each time the pronunciation getting longer, almost as if the word had started out being spoken with a perfect tone of speech, and as time went on, it sounded like the voices were becoming intoxicated, slower, slurring together and descending into an eternity where it would take years to complete itself.
Alexandra.
And just like that, the image of the girl was gone, and what replaced it was the image of a street. It stretched as far as the eye could see, and what Jack predicted to be maybe 200 cars stretched along with the road, they too eventually disappearing from view. The street was empty, apart from various birds sitting on the tops of cars here and there. The view lingered there a second, and then a voice rang out again.
Alexandra.
At first, Jack didn't know who the voice belonged to. He thought it might be someone behind him, or maybe beside him, yelling out to the girl he had seen. But after a third time the voice yelled out the name, he realized that the voice was his own.
That's weird. I'm not using my voice. Why is it saying my name?
Before he could find an answer to the thought, the view of the street spun 180 degrees, changing to that of the opposite angle. A girl, looking as though she was in her late 30s, knelt down on one leg, studying something on the ground. The image moved closer, and Jack saw that it was blood.
The same glowing blood I recall seeing?
He looked at it and tried to remember, thinking back to that one frame of memory at the back of his mind. After a moment, he realized it was a different shape to the one he knew.
What have you found?
His voice sounded out again.
Why am I talking? Why can't I?
And then it came to him. He wasn't controlling his body, but rather watching the scenario fold out. He was an observer, a backseat writer, sitting in the chair and watching his life fold out on the world's biggest cinema screen. Blood, probably from one of them by the look of it.
Do you know where they might have gone?
The woman, who Jack presumed to be Alexandra, stood up from a kneeling position and looked up and down the street. He was curious for a second what exactly she was doing, and then his detective skills kicked in and he knew. She was studying the road for any sign of further blood, looking for a trail to tell exactly where what they were looking for had gone. Looks like they went that way. We could still catch them, but we are going to have to haul ass if we want to.
Then what are we waiting for?
The girl turned back to face the cinema screen. And suddenly, Jack was back. Upon re-entry, he was shot from his mind and back into reality.
What the hell was that? A memory? Am I remembering something? Was I remembering something?
He asked himself these questions, running them through his head, desperately trying to find any kind of answer. But he couldn't. He was on the verge of giving up when he heard the whispers again. Except they were louder this time. They sounded different. Jack listened closely. It took him a few moments, but he knew what was happening. The whispers were beginning to form words. He listened, and he listened. And then he heard one word among the many. The feeling that radiated through his body was sharp, painful, like a knife edge cutting through his skin and implanting itself in the wound.
Jack.
The whispers had spoken his name. At that moment, he forgot everything. He forgot the suicide, the vision, the girl whose name could or could not be Alexandra. He forgot the blood. All he remembered that it was him and the whispers now, nothing else. The end of the world, and this is what it came down to. Who would win the war? He glanced down at the .44 that was still sitting on the table in front of him, considered, and then remembering that the revolver only had one bullet left, he looked away. If he couldn't kill the creatures using a modern-day projectile weapon, he would use something else. Something that maybe couldn't devastate as much as a bullet, but would injure just as accurately. Getting up out of the chair, deciding to leave the bottle of wine behind as well as the gun, Jack stumbled drunkenly to the kitchen and made his way over to the other side of the bench top. Fumbling through the drawers, he had one thing on his mind.
I need the biggest knife I can find.
And the biggest knife he could find? Well, it looked like it could do the chore that he wanted just fine. The blade he picked up was more than kitchen knife size. It looked as though it was a blade that could cut straight through bone if it needed to. Razor-sharp, jagged indents spanned the length of the foot-long blade on both sides, ending in a point that looked deadly to the touch. The hilt was black and standard-looking, although it was bigger than Jack's hand. The detective smiled as he picked it out of the drawer, studying it over, turning his wrist to look at both its sides.
This should teach those assholes a lesson.
The thoughts were with him as he shut the drawer, and afterwards he walked over to the door of the apartment. Stopping as he grabbed the doorknob, he turned back around to look at the revolver. The two objects were thrown up in his mind. On the one hand, he could take the pistol and use the last remaining round to take out at least one of those things, making one less threat he had to deal with. But on the other, what if the knife wasn't enough? What if he went out there, lost the knife, and had to quickly run back into the building? He didn't know how big the things were, or how strong. They could overwhelm him easily, and if he got back into this room, he knew he would rather blow himself away than let the creatures rip him apart. Settling with that second outcome, he turned back around and rotated his wrist. The doorknob didn't budge. At first, he was stupefied by this, and he tried it a couple more times, thinking maybe the cold had stuck the metal, or maybe the device was just faulty. Just as he was beginning to get frustrated, he discovered the origin of the problem. The lock was still latched across the door. Moving his head from side to side and thinking how stupid he had been to even miss a detail like that, he reached up, pulled the latch open, and tried the knob again. It rotated smoothly this time, and he was able to push until he could see what lay beyond the threshold of the room. Unfortunately for Jack, having a faulty memory when it came to remembering the building he was in went hand in hand with not knowing how to get out. He didn't know the layout of the building or what was in it, and that was an advantage he could have greatly used at that moment. The hall was shrouded in pitch-black darkness. Leaning back over the threshold, he sighed. Navigating a building he didn't know in the dark was bad enough. Trying to do the same thing with liquid drugs running through the veins would prove almost impossible. He needed light, and it proved to be close by. Lowering his head to look at the knee-high table stationed to the left of the door, he saw that the top contained multiple objects. A lamp, a wristwatch, a charger plug, and a flashlight. Smiling, he bent down to pick it up, and prayed that whatever batteries still existed within the power pack had enough juice left in them to light the bulb. They did. Raising his wrist, he shone the yellow beam into the darkness. The light proved to be dim, and although it cut through the black, Jack's sense of knowing where he was going would still be hindered greatly. However, it was the best he could do given the resources he had. Without further hesitation, he took one dizzy step into the hallway and readied the knife. Chapter 3. Charles Sawyer walked through the double doors and down the hallway. Turning at the end, he headed towards the office, and once he got there, he grabbed the doorknob, rotated, and swung open the door. As soon as he was over the threshold, he closed it as quickly as he could. "Charles?" He turned, immediately recognizing the voice. "You know, if you want to come into my office, you could just knock. You don't have to barge in every time." He took no notice to this. Instead, he turned from the door and walked over. Looking his partner in the eye, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, placing it on the desk in front of him.
"Can you explain this to me? Or does everything we do here just go over my head?"
The man behind the desk glanced down at the piece of paper as Charles took his hand off it. As the words at the top of the page were revealed to him, he sighed, dropped his pencil, and leaned back in his chair. "Listen, Charles, I can't help it if the trials weren't successful."
"Of course you can help it. Aren't you running the damn things? Don't give me that bullshit, Christopher. You know as well as I do what is at stake here."
The man made his way around the desk and towards the chair, stopping just short at the point in which Christopher would have to physically move it back to make room for him.
"This is the third week in a row we have tried this thing, and it's the third time it's failed. What the hell is going on in that lab of yours? Is every person working under you a fucking first-year university student? Do they have any idea what the hell they are even doing?"
Christopher moved his eyes away from his partner and got out of the chair, turning a full 180 degrees to face the window behind the desk. There were a few moments of silence before he replied. "Charles, you have to remember what we are actually doing here. It's not like it's the easiest thing in the history of the world to do the things we are doing. You have to give it time." Charles Sawyer sighed then, and walked back around to the front side of the desk, heading towards the door.
"Well, we have to find a way to improve the way we handle things. Push those scientists of yours to the limit. I'm not going to waste this funding on failure. We may as well throw it out the window if that's what we're accomplishing with it."
He was about to turn around and open the door to the office, making his leave, but Christopher's movement stopped him in his tracks. As Charles's sentence had left his lips, his partner had turned from facing the window and had slammed both his hands down onto the desk. "Funding? You're concerned about funding? Charles, do you realize what we are doing here is illegal? My team and I are taking risks doing the things we do. We have to be constantly careful, erasing the tracks we leave, getting rid of the records, lying to people who don't know about this stuff, lying to our employer. Do you realize that if he found out what we were actually doing here, jail time would be the last of our worries?" Silence followed the outburst. Then calmly and quietly, Charles spoke his mind on the subject.
"You're concerned about Patterson?"
Those were the only words that were spoken. After, he simply looked at Christopher, shook his head slightly from side to side, then opened the door and walked out, leaving the man standing there, not knowing what to do next. The scientist sat back down and settled his gaze upon the piece of paper Charles had put there. Sighing, he pulled the chair back to the desk, picked up the pencil he had dropped, and re-began the work in front of him. He had decided to trust the batteries of the flashlight 10 minutes into the universe of darkness. Not that he had a choice in the matter. He had made his way around 2 of the hall's corners, and had not yet spotted any means of getting down to the first floor. He did, however, see a lot of splattered blood. Upon stumbling down the hall from the apartment, having to watch his balance with every step, he had been checking to see if he would trip over anything that had been thrown to the ground or placed in the way as a blockade. That part of the journey had been the successful one, but as soon as he had turned the corner into the next section of the seemingly endless apartment doors, it had been upon him, thrown across the wall in a snake-like pattern. One giant wave of dark-colored blood. Walking up to it, he had examined it to the best of his abilities, and discovered that it had turned from something dripping wet into a dry patch of its former self. The feeling of relief that had come over him as he had uncovered the truth was like the weight of the world lifting off his shoulders. The blood wasn't brand new, and that meant that one of the creatures outside, or even another survivor like him living in the building, hadn't just made a kill. He or it wasn't going to come around a corner at some random time and end his life. Overall, however, the examination proved to be something of a waste of time. Not only was the blood old and dried, but it was also beginning to fade. Soon after he had realized this fact, he had shone the light around, trying to find the body that the blood belonged to. He had found it, but also had almost shit his pants in the process. The corpse had proved not to be a great deal away. In fact, it was mere meters up the corridor and in the process of decomposing. Long, grey, stringy bits of flesh hung off the corpse, revealing a skeleton underneath covered in filth. Jack had stood there observing for a while after that, waiting for any noise, any action, anything in particular to confirm that he wasn't alone. There was nothing whatsoever. Only his breathing. Finally, his brain had clicked back into gear, and he thought it better that he venture forward and find the way through the maze. The sooner he got visibility on things, the better. Raising the knife once again to the ready position, the detective had walked down through into the next corridor. The blood in this one was much worse. It was everywhere. Long streaks, puddles, different kinds of patterns. It was all over the walls, the roof, the apartment doors. If Jack had spent his life in any other profession besides the police force, he thought he would have surely vomited continuously until there was nothing left to come out of him. Although, the way the alcohol was affecting him, somewhere inside him he wished he wasn't numb to the violence. If he threw up, it would certainly end the consistent dizzy spell a lot quicker. He shone the light around the floor again, trying to find any signs of a corpse or skeleton nearby. But the search proved to uncover nothing.
Okay, nothing. I can roll with that. That is, as long as I was right before and there's not some psychopathic murderer wandering the halls of this building. And if there is, well, let's just hope he's found a place of interest on the top floor and doesn't decide to come and bother me about what he wants for lunch. As for the possibility that it's one of those creatures, then I think the decision here would be to run like hell.
Jack presumed the man, if there was one, to be a cannibal. And even if the man wasn't a man, and it turned out to be one of those creatures, the police instinct he had developed over those 20 years had taught him to predict the worst rather than the best when the situation was as desperate as his. He observed the area once more, and as happy as he could be with a close-quarters weapon, a flashlight that's batteries could run out at any moment, and a head full of cloudy haze, he pressed on. As he made his way through the darkness, he had noticed that whenever his mind wasn't concentrating on something and he was just following the weak orange beam, it wandered into itself, and he would start daydreaming, just thoughts and images. He would picture himself walking out the door to the building and into the sunshine. All the people in the world would be standing there waiting for him. The whole thing had been a massive hoax. The creatures, the blood, the 44, all just a massive prank on him as a welcome back to the police force present. He would go back to the police station and be sent on another case. Drive home that night, sit in front of the TV, watch the news, have his dinner. And then he would remember that the thoughts weren't real, would be immediately snapped out of his fantasy and pushed back into the real world. After, he would be disappointed, sad almost, then would remember that if he wanted this to end, he could always walk back to the apartment, pick up the 44 that was lying on the table and blow his head off. He had almost done it a couple of times too, stopping in the hallway and looking back the way he had come.
Screw the creatures.
He would think, beginning back.
Screw the creatures. Screw this world, and screw everything about it.
But then he would remember that he heard the whispers say his name. He wasn't quite sure why or how, but thinking about that specific event forced him to go on. Was it the curiosity of it, perhaps? The basic human desire to find out exactly what it was? How it exists? Why it exists? Was it his survival instinct? Was his subconscious pulling him out of the thoughts because his brain wanted him to live, and the part that was producing the suicidal thoughts was physically being pushed back? Either way, the term curiosity killed the cat could very much be applied to at least half of his mind in the situation. Through these thoughts, however, he was always able to come back to the one question that had bothered him so much as he had begun his journey. Why had the whispers said his name? And why had it caused him to venture out? After all, it was only his name. They may be intelligent creatures. He never knew. Maybe a window had been left open in the apartment when the previous people had evacuated, and when Jack went to sleep, he would have nightmares, and in those nightmares he would say his name out loud, and the creatures down below could have heard that, and simply be copying. Like a parrot copies his owner's words. The parrot doesn't actually know what they mean, but because the animal has such a good ear, he learns and repeats, and he gets treats for repeating, so he learns that if he says the words his owner teaches him, he gets fed. Maybe those creatures say Jack's name, and survivors come, and the creatures feed. It's the same basic system, although Jack hadn't heard any screams of gunfire, and from where that apartment window was, he could look down into the street, and he never saw any bodies. But then again, he never saw any creatures either.
I never see any creatures either.
The thought had caused him to stop in the middle of the hallway and lower the flashlight.
There's never been any creatures. I would have looked out there dozens of times. I hear the whispers, and I see nothing.
The thought had never occurred to him before.
Why have I never thought of why they weren't there?
Jack was baffled. Words left him. Standing alone in the darkness, the torch lowered to his side, he tried to remember seeing anything, and then yet another thought occurred to him, one that shocked him so much he nearly had to sit down. The thought was uncharted territory, something he had never thought possible because it wasn't possible. It defied the very laws of nature which the world obeyed by.
What if the creatures... What if they were invisible?
He couldn't come up with another reason as to why he had heard the sounds and never seen them. Leaning against the wall and closing his eyes, he tried his best to pull up a memory of the creatures. He didn't care what part of the body, the leg, the arm, the head. He just needed something to confirm that they weren't invisible. He needed anything.
They can't be. They just can't be. I must have seen them. Once, twice, 3 times? It's the alcohol, that's all. It's clouding my memory. I'm not thinking straight. There must have been a time, even once. I know I have seen them. I know I have.
Diving inside his mind, much like he had the first time while in the apartment, the answer came to him, and it was the answer he was looking for. The first sound of the memory were 2 gunshots. 2 gunshots from his .44 Magnum revolver. Chapter 4. Jack was back in the chair, watching the cinema screen. The revolver had fired twice, and in quick succession. The trigger pulled back, the hammer slamming down on the cartridge, and the bullet flying through the air, covering the length of 1,200 feet per second. "Jack, there's more of them, coming from the other side!" The cinema screen turned 90 degrees, and the revolver fired again. "To the far left, Jack! To the far left!" He fired.
5 bullets, 6 bullets, 7 bullets.
From the other side of the screen, the Jack that was watching his memories was mentally counting the bullets that had been used up. And as the chamber spun into the 8th cartridge, a single thought occurred to him.
Was that how I used up the bullets?
The question was never answered.
There's too many!
It was the him playing out the memories talking now.
We have to fall back. We can't take them on.
Back around the corner then, come on! The rotation again. And then the image of the girl that Jack had seen the first time he was looking through his memories. The Jack on the screen sprinted in the direction of the girl as she disappeared around a bricked building, leaping onto the hood of a taxi and then down onto the pavement again. The corner of the building came up and was rounded, revealing Alexandra once again. She was 20 or 30 meters out front, looking behind every few seconds to make sure her companion was still behind her, and that he hadn't fallen behind by getting held up on something or being attacked by whatever was after them. She rounded another corner, and upon catching up with her, the Cinema Jack found her leaning against the wall in a seated position, holding her rifle, the muzzle pointed upwards in her hands. She was ready for combat, this much was certain. Around her waist, an ammo belt was fastened in place, although the remaining bullets only filled about half of the belt's slots. Hanging off to the left of her body was an M9 in a black holster. She wore a white tank top, and dark patches could be seen around the neck hole and under the arms. She had been running from place to place so much, the sweat had soaked right through her clothing. Well, don't just stand there. What are you waiting for? Get behind me. You have a revolver with one bullet left, and I have an automatic rifle. Who do you think would be more of a valued person in this situation? You or me? Springing into action, Cinema Jack ran past and knelt behind her, steadying himself by laying his hands on the brick wall. Meanwhile, Alexandra had lowered the muzzle of the gun, and was now peering around the corner, waiting to open fire on anything that could have followed Jack around the bend. After a few seconds of seeing nothing, she leaned back around to face the screen. It seems like nothing was that close behind us, but we better stay on guard anyway. Those fuckers are a nasty bunch. She turned back and leaned out of the corner once again, readying the rifle.
What the hell happened?
I'll tell you what the hell happened, Alexandra responded without taking her eyes off the alleyway. We went down 7th Street, is what happened. They came out of nowhere, is what happened.
I thought we had that covered.
Well, we obviously didn't, did we? They must have snuck past Jake. Probably killed him, I'd say. Sons of bitches.
So, what the hell do we do now? How do we get out of here?
You're the freaking detective, how about you figure it out? The conversation was ceased after that. All that could be heard was the air rolling through the streets of New York, and the sound of the gun being moved around every few seconds. Alexandra watched and waited for whatever was after them to come around the corner while Cinema Jack looked for anything that could give them a way out of there. The woman had led the two of them into a trap. To the right of them, the brick building continued until the end of the alleyway, and another building started, giving them no escape, unless they wanted to climb up the side of the building holding nothing but brick. A fire escape was located on the side of the building, but it looked too high to reach, even when jumping. The detective thought on it for a second, then decided against it. He didn't want to waste their time trying to grab a ladder and extend it when the threats were present. There was no way out opposite them either. Given, it was only a wire fence, but the top was fitted with barbed wire, threatening to cut the hands to pieces of anybody who dare climb it to the top to try and get over. They were trapped on all sides. There was no way out of this. Either they would die here, or defeat the enemy they were facing.
There's no way out.
There's got to be. Keep looking. Use those detective skills like your life depended on it, because frankly, at the current time it does.
Listen, there's no way.
Jack, find a goddamn way out. Taking his eyes away from the girl, Cinema Jack surveyed the area again, trying to locate any possible outcome that they had missed. A water pipe they could climb up, something they could stand on to get to the fire escape, another way down an alley that they hadn't seen before. But then he did see it. A gap in the fence right down the end of the alleyway. It didn't look as though there was enough room for a person to squeeze through, but if he could make it a little bigger, they would be home free. Getting up from the leaning position he was in, He ran over to the end of the alleyway and knelt beside the gap.
Do you have any wire cutters?
He asked the question, but he knew the answer before Alexandra even responded. No, I don't have wire cutters. Do I look like some sort of magician to you?
Yeah. Waste time by asking questions that have obvious answers. Really going to help you out there, Jack?
He muttered this to himself as he grabbed hold of the fence and started pulling it towards him. It took effort, but slowly the fence began to move, to fold up onto itself, creating a space they could crawl through.
Alexandra, come and give me a hand with this.
The girl looked over and saw that he was pulling the fence open. She started backing back towards him, keeping the muzzle of the weapon focused on the corner of the building. She wasn't going to turn her back on anything that could come around the corner at any second, even to get to the end of the fence faster. Arriving where her acquaintance had, she grabbed the corner of the fence with her free hand, but kept the muzzle of the rifle steady with the corner. Pulling with him, she began to feel the fence was starting to change shape under the pressure.
It's folding.
The detective said this through clenched teeth, and soon after the pulling was ceased, the space between the concrete and the fence was now big enough for them to crawl through one at a time.
You go first, and then I'll follow you.
But I've the gun. I'll be able to cover you.
Listen, do you want both of us to die because we were arguing about who's going to go first? Or do you want to hurry up and get the hell out of here? The ball is in your hands.
Sighing, Alexandra slammed the gun into Cinema Jack's chest, lowered herself onto her stomach, and crawled through the gap. The detective wasn't far behind. Come on, let's go! She was already pulling him up before he could make the action himself, and together they ran across the street and into the next alleyway. When they were clear of the road, Alexandra went to take back the gun, and Jack denied it to her. I'm the better shot, she retaliated, looking at him with a burning anger.
I've been in the force longer. I can hit a target from a distance of 1 kilometer without anything but iron sights, and if you don't believe me, you can ask Captain Jones when we get back to the station. I'm sure he would be happy to show you the results of my fire range test.
She shut her mouth, not wanting to protest any further. Suddenly, the sound of glass shattering could be heard from behind them. The screen spun to the opposite direction, and that's when Jack saw it. A figure coming through a thick layer of dust, or was it smoke? He didn't have time to figure it out. Cinema Jack was already raising the gun to look through the sights. His finger came to wrap itself around the trigger. Without so much as a warning, the muzzle of the rifle lit up, and the gunshots sounded out. Chapter 5.
Give me a status report. I want a full rundown of everything that happened while I was in my office.
Charles closed the door behind him as he walked into the room. He's stable, life signs are good. Nothing to tell us that the treatment has gone wrong. So far, his body actually seems to be accepting it.
Accepting it? Wasn't he one of the candidates that were labeled ineligible after the first test?
Not precisely. We did test the product on him, and the body did have a bad response. However, after scanning again, we discovered that he didn't entirely reject it like we thought. Some of the serum was working the way it's meant to. The scientist turned from the observation window to glance at the man beside him.
Well done, Doctor. Keep up the good work.
Will do, sir. A slap on the back was given to the man, and Charles turned and walked up to the door which led to the laboratory. He was going to study his best student, up close, and personal. His eyes refocused on the objects inside the hall as he came out of the memory that seemed to play so long inside his mind. It had taken its toll on Jack, and when he was fully conscious and aware of his body again, he had slid down the wall and dropped the flashlight, causing it to roll away, and after a few seconds, come to settle at the end of the hallway, the beam facing into the unknown. He felt that he couldn't breathe right. It seemed as though his lungs had decided to start to shut down on him, simulating the feeling of a large amount of weight on his chest. It felt as if a python had wrapped itself around him and was squeezing tighter as time went on, waiting until the moment he gave up, his body went limp and he was dead. At that point, he would be its next meal. It would eat his body, one chunk at a time. He would be digested, and then the snake would move on, wanting to find bigger and better things that it could eat away its day on. His head was hanging in a face-down position, staring into the darkness where the carpet should have been. His eyes were shut, and his body was in a status of ragdoll syndrome. Although his mind was still there, groggy as it was, but the feeling was like that's all he was. Just a brain floating in the never-ending chasm of space, destined to live out its life in complete and utter silence. He had a thought then. It was a cloudy haze of a thought, and deep in the back of his mind, but it was there nonetheless.
Is this what those people felt like when they went into those giant isolation tanks?
He had seen the movie Altered States as a child, and had always wondered if visions like the ones Edward Jessup saw would really happen if a person was put into a position like that, or was it simply Hollywood garbage? The way he was now, he felt like this was the closest he would ever get to the actual feeling of an isolation tank, and that maybe the visions weren't true. How would he know? He was just in the darkness, and he was having a vision of what he thought might have been a lost memory. Something his mind was keeping from him until he chose to access it. This whole situation he was living was like a vision. He thought if he kept diving through his memory, and coming back into this world frequently enough, he would no longer be able to tell what was a memory, and which was the present day. He would have to deal with each world as its events unfolded, do what he had to in one world, and emerge into the other. In the end, the job had to be done, and that was all there was to it. As his mind came back, it seemed to respond slowly, like a faulty light. Such as if a man walks into a workshop and flicks the switches of old light bulbs. Each light takes a few seconds to turn on, and then finally doing the job it was meant to do. Almost as if it was remembering that providing the light was its job in life, the sole reason it was created. He opened his eyes slowly. At first, the darkness he was staring at was too intense to tell the difference between the back of his eyelids and the world beyond. But as he turned his head and spotted the flashlight, he knew he was back in the world of the living, the world of the conscious, the world that had ended. Pushing himself off the wall and into a crawling position, he made his way towards the flashlight and picked it up, scanning the hallway for anything that had gone astray when he was in the other place. He was coming to think of it as the world of Cinema Jack. That name was appropriate because of the things he saw. It was him on the screen, no doubt, but because he couldn't remember doing those things, it was like he was watching an action movie. What would happen around the next corner? Monsters? Criminals? Would he get shot? Would he make it out alive? Find out in the adventures of Cinema Jack 3, The Revenge of the Memory. Remembering that world and everything in it suddenly made him think about the knife. It hadn't been in his hand when he woke up, and he hadn't seen it when he had been scanning the room only moments before.
Where is it? Where's the knife? If I don't have that knife, I can't defend myself.
And then the panic ceased. It was lying on the ground beside the place he had been before. Walking over, he bent down and picked it up. The darkness was getting to him, and he was letting it invade his thoughts. Composing himself and taking a deep breath, he turned back around to face where he had to go.
Come on, man. Pull it together. You're a detective, for God's sake. You have faced murderers. You've been in shootouts. You have had your life threatened on a daily basis. Just because you are in a world where you're alone does not make any difference. You just have to be more careful, that's all. Focus, Jack. Focus. Don't lose track of the goal here.
But what was the goal? He had searched inside his mind to find out if the prediction of the creatures outside being invisible was either true or false. In the vision, he saw he had been running away with the girl. They had been defending themselves. But did he see them? Did he see the monsters that whisper? In those few seconds when Cinema Jack had raised the rifle to fire at the thing coming through the haze, had he seen anything? Even an outline would do. He pulled up that one frame of memory in his mind, looking through the sights of the rifle, the finger around the trigger. What was beyond the rifle? There was an outline of something. It was like looking at it through a dim light, like trying to see the road through the headlights in a thick fog, but he saw it. A figure walking towards Cinema Jack. He sighed and felt the weight of the world being lifted off his shoulders. At that moment, the confirmation was sound. He chuckled at himself.
Of course the creatures weren't invisible. Nothing is invisible. It's impossible. Nothing has a power like that. Don't make that same mistake again. You're here, and it's the end of the world. It may be a bit lonely, but there's no invisible creatures outside. You haven't seen them because you simply haven't been looking in the right places. That's all. Get a hold of yourself.
Jack smiled, and slowly turned in the direction which would lead him onwards. Taking a step forward, he walked on, feeling for the first time since he put the barrel of the .44 in his mouth that he was in control of his own destiny. My son. He came through the hallway and out into the living room, that look of typical exhaustion on his face. As usual, he had been playing all morning out on the farm. He was dirty,